Vladimir Putin!
Not since Adolf Hitler has the world feared a dictator like Vladimir Putin.
This is the most serious crisis humanity has ever faced.
Hitler's insanity sparked a world war. Tonight, we're asking, could Putin, the tyrant, do the same?
You have an aggressive psychopath in the Kremlin with nuclear weapons and a taste for blood.
Will he stop with the carnage and destruction of Ukraine? Will anything satisfy his mad ambition?
There is something wrong there. There is a screw loose.
But should we be surprised?
For too long, we have let him get away with atrocities.
Tonight, we'll investigate whether Putin has lost his mind.
I believe that Putin is a good leader of Russia.
He is clearly psychologically deranged.
Has he unleashed a war that will turn global?
Don't kid yourself. That's called World War III.
We don't want this. We never wanted this. We never asked for it.
And we ask, where will it end?
Billions of people dying and humanity devastated.
He has said that Russian troops will not attack civilians.
You're talking rubbish, Tony. You're a disgrace.
You're sitting in your safe place and you are there to tell me what's happening in my country.
Doesn't Vladimir Putin think he's invincible?
Is there a force in the world right now that is able to stop Putin from doing what he's doing?
Good evening, I'm Liz Hayes, and this is Under Investigation. Joining me, defence analyst Malcolm Davis.
He is a Hitler with nuclear weapons.
Russia expert Dr. Robert Horvath.
He is absolutely amoral.
And former Australian diplomat Tony Kevin.
Putin is the legitimate president of Russia. He has already won this war.
In London, weapons specialist Hamish de Bretton-Gordon.
This is a person who has threatened us with nuclear war. That would be the end of everything.
And in Kiev, politician turned freedom fighter Kira Rudik.
He is Adolf Hitler of the 21st century. And this is why Ukrainian nation is fighting so hard.
Мы видим это. Бендеровцы и неонацисты.
Putin publicly stated his reason for invading Ukraine was that he wants to rid the country of Nazis and drug addicts. It's believed he plans to install a puppet government and get rid of all dissidents, starting with Ukraine's President Zelensky.
They came to our land, to our houses. We didn't invite them, but they're here.
In short, for Putin, it seems the entire country of Ukraine and its people will serve Russia or die. Sound familiar? Well, it should. Many will tell you it's Adolf Hitler, virtually word for word.
Attacking civilians, attacking hospitals, even attacking schools, unconcerned by the collateral damage. It appears that he has the same lack of morals and scruples that Hitler had in the Second World War.
I think that Adolf Hitler and Vladimir Putin are cut from the same cloth. I think it's a dream of nationalism and greater empire in the same way that Adolf Hitler had a dream of nationalism and greater empire. It's a hatred of another people. In this case, the Ukrainians. Hitler had a hatred of the Jews.
Putin is the man, after all, who believes that the president of Ukraine is a Nazi. The president of Ukraine is of Jewish origin, and a lot of his family were murdered in the Holocaust.
Can I give you a couple of metaphors?
Once Australia's ambassador to Poland, Tony Kevin has become sympathetic to Vladimir Putin and his war.
If New Zealand behaved towards us the way in which the Nazi gangs who've effectively taken control of Ukraine have been behaving towards Russia, we'd have to do something about it.
In fact, extreme right-wing parties are a political fringe in Ukraine, winning just 2% of the vote in the last elections, far less than any other European country.
It's not the point, because I was about to make the point.
But what Tony says today is what the people of Russia are being told by their president.
Специальную военную операцию по защите ДНР и ЛНР.
In the days that the war's been going, there's been an absolutely incredibly small number of casualties. The Russians won this war on the 24th of February, and what's been going on since then is bands of armed thugs who control some major cities.
For Kira Rudik on the front line in Kiev, Tony Kevin's claims of Nazis overrunning her country is outrageous.
You're saying the Nazis? What the hell are you talking about right now? My country is being bombarded by a crazy person. My people are being killed, and you are saying this insanity on the camera right now. This is unprecedented.
Kira's fury is palpable, and with good reason, given Putin's bloodbath is based on a lie.
I'm here, I'm telling you the people are dying. You're telling some nonsense about Nazis that you have never seen because you're sitting in your warm and whatever safe place and you are there to tell me what's happening in my country right now. They bombarded the children's hospital.
Amidst the daily attacks by Russian forces, the targeting of this maternity hospital.
Что это за страна такая, Российская Федерация, которая боится больниц, боится роддомов и уничтожает их?
I'm telling you what is going on here on the ground, where people are being killed by Putin, who is trying to take our country just because he is crazy and he thinks that he can do it. And because NATO is right now is still considering what they are going to do. This is the only thing that is happening. And there is no false narrative. There is the truth and the BS that you are feeding to people right now.
One thing the Russians are brilliant at is propaganda and disinformation. And if your man Tony believes that there are only a few hundred people dead and that this is some peace mission, then Putin is winning. There are similar people like him in the UK who appear to support Putin and spread his vile propaganda. I think what we must do is get the information to the Russian people. If they knew the war crimes and atrocities that were happening in their name, I am sure that they would react and try and do something about it.
This is war. It's war. Putin is waging war against an innocent people, an unprovoked war where his goal is to dismember Ukraine as a nation state. That's unacceptable behaviour in the 21st century, and NATO must stand firm against Russia, because if we don't, then Russia will continue to do this in other parts of Europe.
But what will the West do?
To press on with tightening the economic vice around Vladimir Putin.
Will we confront Putin?
Because we've been weak and we have not stood up to Putin over the last 10 years, he has got some deranged idea that he can act like some modern-day Hitler to take Ukraine against its will, and we cannot, as a moral, free world, allow that to happen.
Coming up...
Until 2 weeks ago, I thought Putin was a pretty evil but intelligent person.
Is Putin losing his mind?
We are at a really dangerous point in human history.
And will he lose the war?
The detailed planning has not got in there because Putin just doesn't understand it.
That's next on Under Investigation.
Time has come to change this.
The first mark of a tyrant is his willingness to lie to the world without caring that he will be unmasked. For months and weeks leading up to his invasion of Ukraine, Vladimir Putin swore it was all propaganda from the United States and the West.
По поводу, хотим мы этого или нет? Конечно, нет.
Even now, weeks into what clearly is an invasion, his ministers claim they have not.
Мы на Украину не нападали. На Украине мы просто...
I want to tell you the story about today, about why we cannot trust Putin, why there is no peace with Putin.
Dear Ukrainian friends and allies, we are right now in Ukrainian parliament.
Kira Rudik is a leading member of Ukraine's parliament. But just over 3 weeks ago, she became a freedom fighter when Vladimir Putin invaded her country.
We will protect our soil with our blood, with our lives.
Every single night we have to hide under the stairs because Putin and his forces are attacking my town, are attacking my house, are attacking our country. There is a boy today who died out of dehydration. And what kind of the world we are living in if in 21st century, in the middle of Europe, there are children who are dying of dehydration because the tyrant decided this is not just not right, this is terrifying. This is why I'm bearing arms to step up and to fight this, because this is not what I want for my country, for my children, for the children of Ukraine. We don't want this, we never wanted this, we never asked for it.
Those who have met Putin in the past say he has changed from being a cold, calculating leader to a man now possessed by the delusion that he is Russia's new Tsar, its absolute ruler, with a personal destiny to restore the greater Russian Empire.
В мировой войне.
According to reports, he is isolated from reality, afraid of catching COVID or being poisoned. When he does meet his generals or foreign leaders, it's from the end of a ridiculously long table. And now he's even threatening nuclear war. Psychology suggests one word for it: paranoia. What is it telling us about the man?
Until 2 weeks ago, I thought Putin was a pretty evil person, but he was an intelligent person. Some of the decisions that he has made in the last 10 days leads one to believe that there is something wrong there. There is a screw loose. This is a person who has threatened us, the international community, with nuclear war. That would be the end of everything. And somebody who is prepared to threaten that is prepared to do absolutely, virtually anything.
World War II and Adolf Hitler, the vilest dictator in modern history, was ultimately stopped by a global alliance fighting against him. But Hitler's defeat was also because of his delusional decisions, made while believing he was a military genius. It is perhaps another Putin parallel.
Hurrah!
Malcolm, who's calling the shots in this war? The tactics are Putin's?
In most authoritarian states, military command and control is very much from the top down. So Putin would have overall command authority. He would be having oversight of what the Russian military is doing on a day-to-day basis.
By profession, he is a Secret Service agent, but he is commanding a conventional war. And we've seen his tank battalions and infantry actually operating very badly, very poorly. And I expect that's probably because the detailed logistics and the detailed planning has not got in there, because Putin just doesn't understand it. We've seen that 40-mile tank line north of Kiev. The soldiers aren't being fed. Their morale is crumbling.
As Ukraine's resistance grows, Russian atrocities escalate, including reports of Putin's forces killing women and children fleeing along humanitarian evacuation routes in the beleaguered south and east of the country.
There is city of Mariupol that is in the east of my country. It has been bombarded almost to the ground. And there are women and children there who demand humanitarian evacuation, humanitarian convoy. And there has been a Red Cross mission that has come to take them out of there. And Putin gave us the word three times that he will let them humanitarian convoy out. And every single time of those, when the people women and children who are starving, who don't have water, who don't have humanitarian aid, were trying to get out. Russian soldiers were firing their guns at them.
When you see Russian forces shelling humanitarian evacuation routes, where you see Russian forces deliberately mining those evacuation routes purely to kill civilians, Putin would know about that. He would have to give that authorization.
Chemical weapons expert Hamish de Breton-Gordon has fears that when Putin's forces try to take Ukraine's larger cities, his brutalities will get worse. Barbaric acts like those committed in Syria, where Putin covered for dictator Bashar al-Assad, who killed his own people with poisonous gas.
Once we get into fighting in the cities, like Kyiv, I think it's going to turn very, very bad indeed. Huge casualties on all sides. In Syria, those sieges were always finished with chemical weapons. And I don't see Putin having any qualms about using chemical weapons.
It's that horrific prospect that has Ukraine's president pleading with the US and NATO to enforce a no-fly zone over his country.
We are speaking about closing the sky. Now it's very bad. And in future, it will be too late.
But so far, the skies still belong to Putin. Despite heroic and unexpected resistance by Ukrainian ground forces.
We have been told that we will not stand for more than 48 hours. And we are standing right now. Putin has not taken any major city of Ukraine. And we keep fighting. And we are very good in fighting on the ground. However, we do need support from the air. And this is what we have been pleading to the whole world, to the NATO countries. Give us the no-fly zone over Ukraine. Close the sky for us, so we will be able to fight his troops on the ground. And this is the crucial question. Is there a force in the world right now that is able to stop Putin from doing what he's doing?
Tony, how do you see Vladimir Putin and what would stop him?
Russia is facing an existential national security crisis. It's been building for the last 25 years.
Former Australian diplomat Tony Kevin unashamedly supports Vladimir Putin, and his view is a mirror of Putin's propaganda that Nazis are in charge in Ukraine.
These are not nice people. They have anti-Russian mentality. That's what drives them. There's a lot of anti-Semitism in their ranks, and then
I'm sorry, that's wrong.
Oh, please, would you give me my ability to answer my question, please?
You are spreading an untruth here.
Oh, am I?
Corridors
Everything
were
you've said so far has been untrue, and you interrupt me while I'm speaking.
Yes, do you have an answer to that?
Yes, I do. He's won the war in Ukraine. He has air superiority. His forces command a very large part of Ukrainian territory already. It just had to be done. It was a boil that had to be lanced. It was a cancer that had to be cut out.
That is the most insane analogy.
Thank you. That's your
Russia
view.
is committing crimes against humanity.
Don't listen to people lying to you with the Putin's propaganda in their words, because he doesn't care for human life, and these are the facts, not something that Putin wrote in his small book and gave you to read it on the TV. So now there is a question regarding the countries of NATO of how are they going to act? NATO is saying, yeah, it's very scary. We don't want to provide you with a no-fly zone because it can start the World War III. I can tell you it has already started.
I think we need to really seriously threaten no-fly zones, because that's what Putin is really concerned about, is if his aircraft cannot maneuver over Ukraine and his ground troops are operating so badly, I think the Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian militias will very quickly turn him over.
But defence analyst Dr. Malcolm Davis believes a no-fly zone might set off a chain of escalation that could end in doomsday.
If we set up a no-fly zone over Ukraine, the Russians will test it, and we will have to shoot down Russian aircraft. And the challenge then is, what is the escalation chain from that point onwards, where we've just shot down Russian aircraft or they've shot down our aircraft? And the risk is it goes all the way up to a global thermonuclear war. And then you have billions of people dying and humanity devastated potentially for centuries.
Coming up, the nuclear threat.
The objective of Putin is to maximize civilian casualties.
Weapons of mass destruction.
He already threatened to do it.
In the hands of a madman.
He is prepared to unleash any kind of violence as long as it helps to maintain himself in power.
That's next on Under Investigation. For Ukrainians, these are the darkest days. An unprovoked onslaught by a massive military force. But surely the most terrifying prospect facing Ukraine and the world is Vladimir Putin's apparent willingness to use the worst weapons of all. Putin recently put his nuclear arsenal on high alert. And as the world already knows, Russia has stockpiles of the deadly nerve agent Novichok and has shown no compunction using it in the past. In March 2018, Russian agents used Novichok in the UK in their attempt to murder a former spy.
Он просто подонок.
They turned the city of Salisbury into a chemical war zone.
It took us 18 months to decontaminate Salisbury for a quarter of an egg cup of this stuff.
Chemical weapons expert Hamish de Bretton-Gordon lives in Salisbury and saw the devastation caused by Novichok, a deadly substance banned by international treaty.
It took 13,000 hours, 37 vehicles were buried or destroyed, and tons of rubble were taken away from Salisbury and buried or burnt.
Russia's chemical attack killed an innocent woman and left a policeman, Nick Bailey, crippled for life.
My whole body was just dripping with sweat. I was very, very unsteady on my feet. The sweating had gone from my forehead down my back. I was confused. I didn't know what was going on, and it was really, really frightening.
What does it tell us about the man?
It tells us that he is absolutely amoral, that he is prepared to unleash any kind of violence as long as it helps to maintain himself in power, because he is so corrupt that he has no way out. Putin has such a record of criminality behind him that he has no way out. The best he can hope for if he loses power is life in a prison cell in The Hague.
Dr. Robert Horvath has studied Vladimir Putin for decades and believes he will use any weapon he has to save himself from the fate of dictators before him, like Romania's Nicolae Ceausescu, shot by firing squad in 1990, Saddam Hussein, hanged in 2003, and Muammar Gaddafi, who died at the hands of a mob in 2011. According to Robert, it's that kind of violent end that Putin fears most.
Putin's conduct relies on terror. He's employed terror for many years. He has shown no concern about human life, and I think that's one thing he's thinking now. It's that he sees himself in that place where suddenly everyone's left him and he's trying to escape with his last 3 bodyguards, and he's cornered.
So if he's disconnected from reality, then we are in serious trouble.
Classic example, what would Adolf Hitler have done in the final days of the Third Reich if it had nuclear weapons? I do think we are in that sort of downfall scenario where you have a leader that is isolated from the truth, isolated from voices of reason and opposition, surrounded himself with yes men, and is firmly believing in his own messianic destiny. And he's got 6,500 nuclear weapons and a willingness to use them. That's the real danger here, that we're already in World War III, we just haven't crossed swords yet.
He already threatened to use the nuclear weapons. He already have done this. So what else do you think should happen?
In Kiev, parliamentarian turned freedom fighter Kira Rudik says NATO and the West are not taking seriously enough Putin's nuclear threat.
NATO countries right now standing behind and saying, hush, hush, we will hope that he will not be using it. Or we don't want to start the nuclear war. He already threatened to do it. This is what the dictators do. And the only thing that he responds very well is to power when you are able to say, no, you're not going to do it. You know how we say about the war and shame? That if the war comes to your country and you choose the shame, then you get both war and the shame. And this is what NATO is doing right now.
His threatened to use nuclear weapons, I think, is to terrify the international community. So we go to our leaders to acquiesce and don't get involved in Ukraine. And that's obviously the last thing that we're going to do. I think the other thing is if he is prepared to use nuclear weapons, he's probably prepared to use almost any weapons. And I've seen chemical weapons used extensively in Syria, and that is something that we need to be really concerned about.
Putin's propaganda has trumpeted its so-called mother of all bombs, the most powerful non-nuclear explosive ever created. And there are reports this terrifying weapon has already been used in Ukraine.
The objective of Putin here is to maximize civilian casualties, to blast them into surrender, to essentially break their will. So what he's doing is he's committing war crimes on a day-by-day basis in Ukraine. He's killing thousands of Ukrainian civilians.
Putin has conducted an unprecedented limitation on rules of engagement during this war. He has said that Russian troops will not attack civilians, that Russian troops will not attack...
You're talking rubbish, Tony. You're talking rubbish. You're a disgrace.
What is like a rubbish? It's like really what's going on here. Have you ever heard yourself? Have you even looked at yourself about that? This is a total nonsense.
Vladimir Putin's unprovoked assault on Ukraine is the largest ground war in Europe since World War II. But if we are dealing with a madman, what chance is there for any reasonable end to this conflict? Is compromise, even a back down, a psychological impossibility for Putin? Experts have said that his aggression, narcissism and lack of empathy suggest he could be suffering a mental disorder. He is showing all the signs, is he not, of what would be classically considered a psychopath?
Yep, I agree with that. I think he is a psychopath.
If we accept that this is part of his makeup, what is he thinking right now? What is he personally thinking?
He probably believes he is winning because he believes his own twisted logic and no one's telling him you're not winning. Everything's going horribly wrong. And when he is confronted with that reality, I take you back to the Führer in the bunker situation. He goes into a volcanic rage. Who knows what he's capable of doing when he's finally confronted with the reality that he's created. He has utterly failed Russia as a leader. He's failed the Russian people and he's threatened the world. And when he's confronted with that, I worry that he's going to escalate, that he's going to choose, I must push forward no matter how much it costs.
All or nothing.
All or nothing.
Coming up, how will it end? What would you be saying to him?
I would be saying, keep your nerve.
How can it end? Will Russians rise up?
We have an undemocratic, corrupt, authoritarian regime.
And could Putin himself become a target?
If it had been some leader in the Middle East, he would have been bombed by now.
That's next on Under Investigation. There does exist one, possibly remote, outcome for the crisis ignited by Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine. With Russia sanctioned by the world, its banks unable to do international business, and its economy and currency spiralling, Putin may yet be defeated from within. What is his weak point? Where is his weakness?
His weakness are the Russian people. Stand Fast Tony, obviously supporting him, and others like him. But I'm sure the Russian people, if they understand the crimes against humanity that are being committed in their name, then they will do something about it. And let's hope there are a few good men and women close to Putin who sees this disaster unfolding and will aid the rest of us to remove him and prevent Ukraine developing into a Third World War.
The reason these attacks are happening is because Vladimir Putin's in power.
One man who has suffered because of Putin's apparent paranoia is Russian resistance leader Vladimir Kara-Murza, who, at great risk, is currently leading protests in Moscow against Putin's invasion of Ukraine.
The reason these attacks are happening is because we have an undemocratic, corrupt, authoritarian regime established and maintained by the close circle of former Soviet KGB officers around Vladimir Putin and led by Vladimir Putin. You know, we have no free elections in our country. We have no independent media on a large scale in our country. We have hundreds, and this is by conservative estimates, hundreds of political prisoners sitting in our prisons today, not because they committed a crime, but because they have crossed the path in one way or another of the current regime.
But anti-war protests are gathering force on Putin's home soil, despite a violent crackdown and a Russian media blackout. Tony, you've been in Moscow, you've just come back from Moscow. It is a truth that Putin has shut down the independent media. Former Australian diplomat Tony Kevin supports Vladimir Putin's regime.
Russian people still have access to internet. They follow internet avidly. They
have increasingly less access to the internet because the Putin regime is throttling websites, it's shutting down websites. It has introduced draconian laws that impose 15 years of prison for fake news about the war. And fake news in the language of the Putin regime means anything that does not accord with the official lies. Putin is waging a genocidal war in Ukraine, but he's also waging a war against his own people.
Can I ask you this? Would you love Russia less if Vladimir Putin was not there?
It's an irrelevant question because Vladimir Putin has the confidence of his people.
Right.
He has the confidence.
He has their confidence because he's suppressed freedom of speech, he's suppressed normal politics, he's destroyed democratic institutions. You silence them, but he has their confidence. I've been there for the last month. The Russia I lived in for the last month is not the country you described. People are not silenced. They're proud of their country. They will not accept the narrative that you Western information warriors are trying to gaslight them with.
Russia will be disconnected from the internet. They will go like internal. This will happen just because Putin already closed all the independent media, but I don't think that will change a lot for Russian people because they're being kept like in the dark.
Despite Putin's attempts to suppress the truth, it is clear that many Russians don't like this war. Hundreds have already been arrested while protesting against it. Malcolm and Robert, is it possible that Putin will be defeated by his own people? Is that possible?
Look, that's the best case outcome here. And when it becomes clear to Putin and to the people around him that Russia is losing and losing badly, two possibilities emerge. Either Putin will be deposed in a coup d'etat, which comes with risks, because if Putin, like an animal cornered, fears that he's got no other place to turn, he'll lash out and escalate, and we're back to the nuclear question. And that's what really worries me, is that second option.
Robert, the oligarchs, is it possible that they have got some sway?
I think we are beginning to see splits within the elite. Signs of how uncomfortable some of the people around Putin are was evident at the surreal session of his Security Council, where he basically humiliated a whole series of his subordinates publicly. That's a sign of just how deranged Putin is now and how unstable this regime is.
Is there also one more solution to the world's most dangerous man? Would America, the West, come to consider him such a threat to peace and security that he would be personally targeted, taken out as just another terrorist? This is a bold question, but is it possible the West may view him as a terrorist and deal with him as they have other terrorists?
Yep, I agree with that. And for too long, we have let him get away with atrocities. That if it had been some leader in the Middle East, he would have been bombed by now. You have an aggressive psychopath in the Kremlin with 6,500 nuclear weapons and a taste for blood. He invaded and annexed the Crimea in 2014. He got no response. He invaded and annexed parts of Georgia in 2008. He got no response. He assassinated people with chemical weapons in Britain. Virtually no response. He shoots down an airliner, MH17, over Donetsk. No response.
Yeah. If you were sitting with Vladimir Putin, and of all of us, you'd be the closest to doing that. Tony, what would you be saying to him?
I believe that Putin is the legitimate president of Russia. He speaks on behalf of the Russian people. I would be saying, keep your nerve.
Coming up,
thousands and thousands of people killed.
We enter the most dangerous days of the war.
This is the most serious crisis humanity has ever faced.
Will the West stand up?
We're looking over an abyss.
Or back down?
If we fall into it. End of.
That's next on Under Investigation.
Look at all the wrong and take it all.
Just coming out of the great pandemic, we are now living through the most perilous time of this current century.
Direct confrontation between NATO and Russia is World War III. Something we must strive to prevent.
As we've examined tonight, there are no easy paths to peace, no easy means of stopping Vladimir Putin's campaign of terror in Ukraine without seemingly provoking what could become a global conflict. Most of all, as we've discussed, there is no easy way of dealing with a tyrant and a madman if that is what Vladimir Putin truly is. So, are we up to it? And what will it take? Our experts believe we could be entering the most dangerous days of the war so far.
This is the most serious crisis humanity has ever faced. For 20 years, Putin has destroyed every single check and balance in Russia. He is clearly psychologically deranged. He is seriously deluded. He enjoys raising the possibility of nuclear war. His propagandists boast that he's more virile than Soviet leaders because he's prepared to wage nuclear war. We are in extreme danger.
I don't accept the false information narrative.
Alone with his views, former Australian diplomat Tony Kevin continues to challenge our other guests' views of Putin.
I've been to Russia, I've seen both sides. I've formed independent views and I will continue to express them without intimidation. And I'm sure that Ukraine will be a happier place, whether in a few weeks or in a couple of months. This will pass.
What?
The Russian system is going to be strong and independent, and it won't be intimidated by the sort of nonsense I've heard spoken here today.
I'm really concerned, you know, if Tony really believes the metaphors he's talking about, and if I was an Australian and I had the honour of serving with the Australian military for a couple of years, you know, I'd be really ashamed of the sort of rubbish that he's purporting there. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. A thought that this will all be over and people won't be killed. I bet you there are thousands and thousands of people killed, and most of them will be Ukrainian civilians. And we must do all we can to reduce that, and equally all we can to find some sort of peace. I think we're on the precipice. We're looking over an abyss that if we fall into it, you know, end of.
It's the war not between Ukraine and Russia. This is the world between values. This is the war between future and the past, between rebuilding the Russian Empire and a new world where countries can be free and decide for themselves, where the world's sovereignty means something. Because what we are facing right now is a real nuclear threat. What we are facing right now is a real humanitarian catastrophe. And what we are facing right now is a real screw up in all mutual trust between the countries.
We are at a really dangerous point in human history, probably the most dangerous since the end of the Second World War. And I wonder what future historians will write. Was 2022 the year that the Third World War began? All things are possible, including the very worst-case scenarios.
Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin.
He is a Hitler with nuclear weapons.
Well, this will be a moment in history we will always remember, and some say a turning point for the world and how we live in it. I want to thank you all very much for joining us this evening, and I thank you too. I'm Liz Hayes. Good night. Next week, is this Australia's worst serial killer?
They are brazen attacks.
This is a person that's not shocked by the crime they've committed.
No second chances.
How a mild-mannered pie salesman...
He was this paunchy, snowy-haired man.
Serial killers don't come with a sign on their head.
...terrorised Sydney.
He probably enjoyed an older person because they couldn't fight back as much.
But are his crimes proof of others?
There were at least 4 unsolved murders. He could be good for any of them.
After 30 years, a top cop breaks his silence.
The placing of the bodies, the method of death, all fitted him perfectly.
That would make him one of the very worst serial killers anywhere, but particularly in Australia.
That's next week on Under Investigation.